Welcome everyone to the current, the North Central Region Water Network's Speed Networking webinar series. The network is an extension-led collaboration among land-grant universities in 12 Midwestern states working to build capacity for effective decision-making on water-related issues. And I see a number of our extension colleagues here in Blackboard collaborate with us today, so good to see you. I'm Rebecca Power, Director of the North Central Region Water Network, and I will be your moderator for this webinar. The purpose of the current is to increase access to university extension programming, and we hope that the information you'll see presented today will be useful to you in your own work. This is the 11th webinar in our series. The format is typically three 10-minute presentations with questions and discussion at the end. Although you get a little bit different format today, we have two speakers in our center slot, but I think you'll find both of their information to be worthwhile. All our webinars are archived on the North Central Region Water Network website at northcentralwater.org. So if you know folks that you think might be interested in the information presented today, please feel free to share the link. And it typically takes us a week to get this the session reformatted for YouTube, which is where we have our sessions posted. So just know that it'll be about a week before we get this posted, and you can share that with colleagues that might be interested. Our topic today is agricultural irrigation management, and thanks and shout out to Josh Stamper, one of our speakers, for helping to organize today's session. Our next month's webinar will take place on September 16th, just a little commercial here. Same time, 2 to 3 Central Time, and the topic will be various aspects of citizen water quality monitoring. So that session should have some overlap between nutrient management and citizen monitoring, which I think you will find interesting. Josh was raised on a farm in North Carolina, has a bachelor's degree in agriculture from Berea College, a master's in agronomy from Kansas State. His past research has included developing nitrogen fertilizer recommendations for winter canola in the Southern Plains, evaluating anhydrous ammonia application timing, rate, and depth of placement, evaluating nitrogen fertilizer loss under irrigation, and how temperature impacts pollen flow and hybrid seed production. Joshua serves as the Irrigation Extension Specialist for the University of Minnesota and is a certified crop advisor and certified professional agronomist. So thanks, Josh, and take it away.
All right, thank you all very much. I'm going to jump up here to the next slide. So before I get into this too much, I want to just take a moment and acknowledge some of the folks that have really enabled us to do this. Josh Cook is a graduate student who's actually doesn't really have much of a background in agriculture other than growing up on a farm. He's studying GIS, and he was really interested in how we can use some spatial methods to evaluate, agricultural inputs. And so when he came to me looking for a project, it was around the same time when I had some growers contact me. I also have to thank some of my colleagues here at the University of Minnesota. Dr. Satish Gupta has put up with a lot of ignorant questions from me and has enabled me to use a lot of his instrumentation, so I'm deeply indebted to him. As we get into this, the issue of variable rate irrigation, these concepts have been around for a long time, and pretty much everybody acknowledges the need to apply irrigation water and a lot of other agricultural cropping inputs at the right rate, the right placement, and at the right time. A lot of times in agriculture, we are really struggling to evaluate how we deal with extreme variability in soils and landscape positions, and everybody kind of acknowledges the need for greater management resolution as we try to work with this. And we also have to ask the question, how can we ensure that we spread irrigation water inputs correctly and appropriately? We've got 2 sites in this study. This is the one I'm going to talk about today is the Belgrade site, and this is what's known as in the Bonanza Valley. The producer just retrofitted this pivot with a bi-nozzle variable rate irrigation resolution. And their primary impetus for this was not necessarily viewing it from variable rate irrigation from an agronomic perspective. They have a bunch of conservation wetlands that are part of this field, and as they talked with some of their dealers and their crop consultants, they kind of evaluated and looked at this and said, variable rate irrigation, they can save, roughly 400,000 gallons of water by shutting the irrigation water off as it passes over these conservation wetlands for every acre inch of water they apply. So, there's some significant water savings to be had with this system. One of the first things that we did when the growers approached us and said, hey, we're really interested in trying to just, if nothing else, answer the question, are we applying the right amount of water at the right time? So the first thing we did was we came in and we mapped the site using an EM38, and then it allows us, it uses electromagnetic induction to give us apparent electrical conductivity. And this is a really useful tool for kind of fine-tuning what we know about the soils really rapidly and at a cost-effective method. There's also tools from Veris that give you a very similar metric, and what we found is that this is a really useful way to assess a site without having to get into any destructive sampling. So what Josh did was, after he came in and mapped the site for apparent electrical conductivity, we also pulled in Surgo data, topographic wetness index, and elevation. We wanted to include some past yield data into how we established our zones, but we were working with a pretty tight timeline, and this site actually got planted on the 14th of April, which is extremely early in north central Minnesota. I grew up in the southeast, and a lot of times, we rarely planted that early in North Carolina. So after we came through and created our zones, we picked out neutron probe access tube locations based off of some statistical assessments of variability. And when it came to how many access tubes could we install in place, we were really limited by how much time did we think we could contribute to traveling to each of these sites, carrying a 30-pound neutron probe around in 22-inch corn. So it created the number of observations we had for this field was really dictated by the logistics and not really a statistical approach. When we initially did created our zones, we actually did it without having any knowledge of the grower's current variable rate irrigation prescriptions that he had developed. And the software that came with his VRI system is pretty user-friendly, but the grower expressed concerns about, I don't really know if this is right. He said, I know that, where I have these kind of light-colored, opaque, like in the very northwest corner of this field, that's where one of the conservation wetlands is. Excuse me. He knew that he wanted to turn the water off there, but when it came to the south and the southeastern corner of the field, where he was backing off his irrigation water volumes by 50%, those were areas where he wanted us to come in and track soil moisture in the profile to kind of give him a little bit better handle on, are these prescriptions correct? And just as a frame of reference, this current prescription saves him 13% It's a 13% water reduction as opposed to if this entire pivot was all green. So that gives you an idea of what their water savings is. In-season measurements, each week we go out and take a neutron probe and collect volumetric water content every 15 centimeters down to a depth of 1 meter. You can also look just past in the background. You'll see it looks like a 2x4 standing up. We also have rain gauges that are placed at each of these sites so that we can quantify the volume of water that's moving into the system at each of these specific sites. I'll talk a little bit about some of the challenges associated with that, especially as you move into ultra-narrow row tall crops. So this is looking at the past couple weeks. The size of these dots represent mean volumetric water content at each of these different sites throughout the field. And one of the things that's interesting is if you look at the July 30th, the first graphic in that line, you'll see that this is actually our measurements following a 5-inch, we had 5 inches of precipitation preceding these readings. So when we look at this July 30th, that really represents a situation where we're really kind of viewing it from a field capacity standpoint. And so you can see how volumetric water content averaged across the profile changes as you move to these different points on the landscape. One of the things that we actually weren't able to do before we started this site, if you go back to that earlier picture where we were mapping with the EM38, we're actually mapping it right after the field was planted, and this was in mid-April. So we weren't able to go in and saturate our access tubes and develop a site-specific calibration. We're actually going to be going in and doing that right after the crop is out of the field. So that way we can have a dry and then have a wetted reference area site for each of these specific access tubes. So this is just to give you a handle on the kind of information that we're collecting as we move through the growing season. Impressions to date, a lot of farmers, a lot of irrigators are really interested in this site. The other location where we're doing something very similar but underneath potatoes is very visible from the highway. When we go out there and travel to the site and collect information, there's almost always somebody stopping, getting out of the truck, wandering out through the potato field, asking us questions about what we're doing, and it's been a great learning opportunity. The growers it's really kind of piqued their interest in managing soil water. And it's also given us a lot of information about where to site soil moisture sensors that growers may want to use. So we can go through and kind of talk with them about available water holding capacity, assessing variability within a site, and where they should be thinking about siting their soil moisture sensors. So with that, I think we can transition to our next presenter. We'll have questions at the end, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Excellent.
And everybody, please, if you have questions for Josh on his first presentation, you can go ahead and put those in the chat box so we can record those and get them ready for the end of the session. And now, on to our next speaker. Actually, John Panuska and Rebecca Larson are going to split this second slot. I'll introduce John first. John Panuska is a Natural Resource Extension Specialist in the Biological Systems Engineering Department at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He teaches courses in BSc at UW-Madison, conducts applied research, and provides outreach programming in the areas of irrigation, drainage, nutrient management, and water quality. And he is part of the University of Wisconsin Extension Nutrient Management team. Thanks, John.
All right. Thank you, Rebecca. And I guess I'll kind of keep it brief here and give Becky some time here, so I'm going to move along a little quickly. I work closely here at UW-Madison with Scott Sanford. The two of us work together on irrigation water management issues. But we have quite a range of growers here in Wisconsin. We have a very well-established vegetable growing region in the central part of the state, our Central Sands area. For those of you not familiar with the state, that's around the Stevens Point area. And there we've got growers that are quite sophisticated and knowledgeable about soil water management and the use of sensors and so on and so forth. But we also have kind of a new group of folks that are coming into the irrigation game. We're seeing a lot of corn and soybean growers as well as dairy farmers putting in irrigation systems. Dairy farmers, of course, for forage insurance to make sure that they do have a forage supply in a dry year. And so we're seeing a kind of a range in terms of knowledge from folks who have been using rather sophisticated instrumentation such as TDRs for the last 20 years to folks that are just barely getting into the whole thing, and they've installed their pivots and the companies and put in the hardware and equipment and kind of left them to manage them themselves. And so this range of knowledge that we had with growers kind of pushed us in the direction of having to do quite a bit of programming and develop a range of programming to address those different areas or different bases of knowledge that we were working with. So just as kind of a side note, one of the other issues here in Wisconsin, again in that Central Sands area around the Stevens Point region, there's a subbasin there called the Little Plover River Basin, and in that particular area there's been some issues with groundwater levels and irrigation impacts on the lakes and streams. And so right now there's currently a study, very comprehensive modeling study going on with USGS, DNR, and the Geologic and Natural History Survey here in the state are taking a very close look at that situation, and it's really quite an interesting project. The growers are very involved in that and very interested in that, and seem to be very willing to make changes as needed to address some of those issues. So it's going to be kind of, I think, a model for our entire Central Sands area here, more or less just starting out with the Little Plover River and looking at, what types of perhaps different crop management schemes and things that can be used to better manage and get more water use efficiency out of that system. So one of our educational efforts has been to get people out there monitoring soil moisture and understanding how these instruments work. And so one of our new publications that we just recently put together, Scott and I worked on these, this new one on methods to monitor soil moisture. It's available through our UWX Learning Store as a free PDF. And in there it's really just an overview of the different technologies. We have some pictures, as you can see there, of some of the different instrumentation. You talk a little bit about the difference between tension and dielectric methods and how the different sensors work and approximate cost. And then also, of course, different types of data management systems, whether those be readers or loggers or telemetry. And then there's some information also that we've added to our website on installation methods for these types of sensors. So really just trying to get people to understand what the technology is, what the range of sophistication of that technology and the cost associated with it, and try to guide them in terms of making choices that will work best for their situation. But just doing whatever we can to get them to start monitoring soil moisture and really seeing what they've got out there. The second publication that we recently redid, this is one that was done back in the 1970s and recently updated. Scott took the lead on this one, and this was our irrigation management in Wisconsin, the Wisconsin Irrigation Scheduling Program, WISP. And so we went through and really kind of more or less updated that particular publication to get it more up to speed with current technology. And also this is the publication that really talks about the concept of excuse me, irrigation scheduling and root zone water balance and how all that works in the different tools that we currently have available to do that, including just a hand method for doing irrigation scheduling. So these are kind of just base documents that that we wanted to get out there and start making growers aware of. The other thing that we just recently completed here, in fact, within the past week, we did a fairly major content upgrade to our website. We have a FYI website, UW Extension crop irrigation site, and there's been quite a bit of material just recently added to that. And so again, here we're trying to create a more or less a repository of information. We did recently also completed a video training series and got that on there. So we're trying to get all this information up to speed, and our goal this time was to get it done before our Farm Tech Days, which is next week. So we did make that goal, and we're going to be promoting that and bringing raising people's awareness to that site at our Farm Technology Days here next week. And then of course we do have an irrigation scheduler. We have several. We have a Excel-based tool that's available on the website, but then we're trying to promote also a web-based scheduler that we've got out there that essentially has the ability to go out and look up the potential ETs based on the latitude and longitude location of the pivot. And it's your basic irrigation scheduling type tool. It's got the daily balances that it keeps track of, water in and water out and so on and so forth. And also we have a feature over here under the percent moisture. Well, they add percent cover, but under percent moisture, a grower can go in and the model will give a predicted value, and they can actually put in their monitored value, and it'll use the monitored value to ground truth the model. Over on the right, we have deep drainage popping up in big red letters to try to bring that to their awareness. So essentially just a soil water balance scheduling tracking tool, and we've also got a feature on here that they can do a partial irrigation strategy. They can put in some percentage of a full irrigation. It'll draw a line across and tell them what that amount is. So the idea there is to just try to get them thinking about different water management strategies and giving them a visual, time series visual of what's going on. And that website for that particular tool is available right below on the bottom of the page. So that was pretty much what I had, and I guess I will turn the podium over to Becky.
Great, John. Thanks. I'll just quickly introduce Becky. Becky Larson is an assistant professor and extension specialist focusing on biological wastes in the Biological Systems Engineering Department at UW-Madison. She completed her bachelor's, master's, and PhD in biosystems engineering at Michigan State. Her research and extension interests include all areas of biological waste, including manure management, handling, and treatment of agricultural waste, diffuse source pollution, agricultural sustainability, and waste-to-energy technologies, including biogas production from anaerobic digestion. A main focus of her work is manure management systems, focusing on increasing profitability and sustainability of food production while simultaneously reducing environmental impact. And Becky's going to be talking to us today about a little bit different aspect of irrigation, which is on manure irrigation. So Becky, go right ahead.
Thank you so much. I think I lost my title page there. Today, my name is Becky Larson. I'm at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'm mostly a manure person. But recently we've had a lot of interest in the state of Wisconsin on manure irrigation. You can see these lovely billboards that we've been seeing around the state with a lot of concerns from the public about the use of manure irrigation as a technology. So responding to that kind of outcry that we saw, we wanted to start to look into manure irrigation and develop some information for all of the public and producers in the state to try to make some recommendations on how we think manure irrigation should be used. So the work group, this has been a project that has been done by a lot of stakeholders in the state. It's led by Dr. Ken Gentzkow. He's also at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He's leading the work group part of this research and evaluation. We have 18 members on the work group. The work group is looking at all the possible benefits and concerns for manure irrigation practices. And then there's a separate piece that is a research component that myself and Dr. Mort Borkart of the USDA up in Marshfield, Wisconsin, have put together looking at pathogen impacts from the use of manure irrigation. So this has been a very large effort that has been put together, something I won't be able to get into very much detail on in the next 5 minutes. But we wanted to evaluate all the impacts and potential fits of the technology so that we could make recommendations to not only producers using the technology, but to some of the regulatory groups within the state. So I have here that we intended to complete this in the spring of 2015. I missed that one. We're now saying sometime in 2015. But you can find all of the work about manure irrigation on our website, and all of the details, and the report will be posted there when it's completed. Some of the benefits and challenges. One of the reasons we were really interested in if we could manage this particular technology and keeping it is that it has great potential to try to increase nutrient efficiency by applying nutrients throughout a growing season. We have a lot of issues with weight on roads, with agricultural equipment, and so manure haulers have been facing a lot of problems in that area. And we also have the potential, when we have overflow and other things, to utilize this type of technology. But there's been a whole slew of challenges we've had to face, from odor to drift to water quality, air quality, and then the really big one that people have been concerned about is the potential for airborne pathogen transport. Our work report will detail all of the information and have our work group response and recommendation on how to use the practice. One of the big things we've been mentioning is the idea of this work group is to look at manure irrigation in comparison to other manure application methods, which are highly variable. We're mostly looking at the traveling gun system, which you can see here, and then also the center pivot system for manure. The center pivot systems have been more of a focus of the larger operations, and we have maybe 10 to 20 larger dairies that are using these at the moment. We don't know the number of producers using traveling guns, but those have typically been at smaller facilities, so therefore we really don't know the depth of implementation, but we have seen more use of those recently. So here's just a few pictures so you can understand some of the concerns that people have with the spray. There's concerns particularly with odor is one big one, and then also with the pathogen potential and the potential for drift to nearby areas as well. So all of those will be addressed in the report. I know I'm probably running out of time, but the one thing I do want to touch on is that we conducted a lot of trials to actually measure airborne pathogen transport with these different types of equipment. We tried to vary it to encompass a lot of the different weather conditions that you may experience out in the field. And then we took that measured data where we actually collected the pathogen samples and did something called a QMRA, which is a quantitative microbial risk assessment, to actually look at what the risk is when people are inhaling those concentrations of pathogens. So I could take forever to explain this, but generally you do a lot of draws and you do a statistical evaluation of people of different ages, breathing in different rates, outside for different time. You take a concentration that we found within the study and what the risk might be. So there's a whole lot of assumptions that are made in doing this, but one of the important things that I want to show here is after you look at the evaluation, you can see this dotted line represents where we think the acceptable drinking water risk. That's what the US EPA uses. And so then we show the median risk is below that drinking water standard, and then the upper quartile risk is ahead of that risk. So the one issue that I want to say is there's a lot of assumptions made here. And one is that you have to assume how the prevalence of these particular microorganisms, and you have to assume what type of microorganism you use as the surrogate to do this particular evaluation. And I don't have time to explain that in great detail, but what I'd like to show you is our current setback is about 500 feet for manure irrigation. So if we use gram-negative bacteria as our surrogate, we look at Campylobacter, Salmonella, and EHEC, you can see the typical prevalence, and the bottom you can see the probability of acute gastrointestinal illness. So those black dots represent the median risk. And when you look down, those blue dashed lines are the drinking water acceptable risk. And the green dashed lines are the recreational water acceptable risk. So these are common standards. We don't really have a lot of these kind of similar standards for inhaling different types of pathogens. So we tried to look at what would happen at typical prevalence. On the right-hand side would be 100% prevalence, which is much more than you would normally see. And then we have these different gram-negative bacteria, which are more easily degradable, and then bovine bacteroides, which is a more hardy microorganism. So you can see our median risk, in my eyes, is a little bit low, definitely below recreational water, but also below, in many cases, if you look drinking water acceptable standards at that 500-foot setback. So there's a lot of things to infer about this, and I apologize, I'm probably even gone over and don't have time to explain it all. But if you look at the report, you can see all the detailed information, and we'll also be doing a webinar when we put the report out on all of the information about that. We're also working on some modeling using some dispersion models, and then we'll also use that model to do some additional QMRA to assess the impact, and we're trying to look at different conditions and different scenarios which may impact what that risk assessment comes out to tell us. Even with that data, there's a lot of different ways to read into that, and so our group has been working with this for 3 years. In our report, we will come out with what our recommendations for use might be. So I know that was kind of a whirlwind. It's a very large project, but thanks for the time, and I will hand it back over to Rebecca.
Thank you, Becky. And this is a great example of trying to give you a taste of some things that are going on in the region and just giving you the opportunity to determine what you want to know more about. So feel free to stick questions in the chat box for Becky, and we will go on to Josh's second presentation, which is outcomes from an irrigation capacity building workshop that had some support and funding from the North Central Region Water Network. And Josh, why don't you tell us what y'all did?
Excellent, thank you. So one of the, last year we had the North Central Region Water Network workshops, and this was in September of 2014. And one of the really cool things about this was the opportunity to get together with a lot of other extension specialists and educators and researchers from other states. And we got to have some really interesting conversations about some of our shared issues relating to water, water quality, water quantity, and how irrigation within our states kind of interacts. And, you know, we all kind of acknowledged that we had a lot of really similar challenges and issues when it came to talking about water quality. And as the group talked a little bit, we said, you know, there's a lot of opportunities here for us to get together and collaborate and maybe pursue external funding. And also to look at some of the irrigation research that's been going on in Nebraska. Nebraska is one of the most heavily irrigated states in the country. They're a little bit more similar to the east than to a lot of the true western states, because a lot of their water allocations are actually groundwater, as opposed to surface water allocations like what you might get in Idaho or California or places like that. So when we started interacting a little bit together, we came up with a proposal, and it was for a multi-day irrigation workshop in Nebraska. And we really wanted to focus it towards getting some of the extension specialists, some of the local educators, some of the researchers, and some of our soil and water conservation district staff that are providing technical assistance to our irrigators. And in Minnesota, those soil water conservation district staff really play a big role in providing irrigators with technical assistance and with irrigation scheduling. They offer that as a service. And we were really interested in collaborating, sharing some of our success stories, and to begin to start looking at how do we pursue some of these external funding opportunities. When we traveled to Nebraska, one of the things that we really enjoyed was some of the really exciting original research that Dr. Swat Ermach at UNL has been doing. And so we spent one afternoon out at the Clay Center research site where Dr. Ermach has a subsurface drip irrigation system. And the picture on the left is the water filtration component of this drip irrigation system, and that's one of the major key kind of linchpins for success is when you're pushing water through very small orifices, you've got to have a lot of really clean water, and you really need to go to great lengths to make sure that you're not plugging those orifices and plugging that tortuous path that the water has to move through the drip tape to be plant available. And the picture on the right is, I think, a monumental feat of engineering and plumbing. These are all the valving and manifolds to run the drip tape at each of the individual plots that are out in the field. Subsurface drip irrigation is not, when you go out and look at a field, it just looks like a field. There's no center pivot. There's no linear traveling gun. So, excuse me. You really have to see the guts of the plumbing to really understand the intricacies of this. One of the other things that we were able to see is Dr. Ermach's Bowen Ratio meteorological station. And so this is where he's actually going in and measuring evapotranspiration using some of this information to refine crop coefficients. But it was really useful for us to get in there and look at the amount of fetch that was needed to be able to accurately quantify and measure evapotranspiration under these. And this is one of 14 or 15 Bowen Ratio stations that Dr. Ermach has spread out across the state of Nebraska. So, I mean, it was really cool to go there and see a critical mass of the information that's being collected that actually helps us quantify actual consumptive water use. Our external grant application that we put together, and that was led by Dr. Ermach, was really, we wanted to kind of have a research and demonstration site that showed how do we use soil moisture sensors to optimize irrigation water management and be able to demonstrate that it reduces the risk to groundwater quality, and that really emerged as a theme. And we base it off of the Nebraska Ag Water Management Network model that Dr. Ermach came up with, and I believe that he's presented that in the past in one of these webinars. The proposal focused on quantifying water quality impacts with advanced irrigation water management. As a component of that was measuring nitrate leaching below the root zone. One of the other things I think that was a little bit different than what we had, than what the engineers and the agronomists historically think about was we really wanted to have a significant economic and social science component to our application. So we were really blessed and really lucky to be able to work with some really great social scientists and economists on this project. When we surveyed our participants, some of the feedback that we got back was they really came away with an increased understanding of how and when to use soil moisture sensors. Irrigation scheduling based on evapotranspiration was really viewed by a lot of participants as being too cumbersome for farmers and irrigators because of the data management and the data entry obstacles. There was also a lot of interest in finding a way to integrate soil moisture sensor data into irrigation scheduling software. In Minnesota, we use a joint irrigation scheduling tool that was developed by our counterparts in North Dakota. Dean Steele and Tom Scher had worked with my predecessor, and it's actually a pretty slick way to be able to come in and make real-time adjustments to the actual soil moisture deficit based off of soil feel and soil texture, or if you have a way to calculate a deficit based off of volumetric water content. That's another way to come in mid-season and pretty accurately correct any drift that we might have seen in our model over the growing season. And another component of this was the telemetry. Making information available in real time proved to be really exciting, and a lot of growers view that as a very powerful tool. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Rebecca, and we can catch questions.
Great, thanks, Josh. Okay, questions for our speakers. Again, put them in the chat box if you got them. I had a question, I think, for both Josh and John. And Josh, you talked about having the potato growers that in your area getting curious about what you were doing in the field. And I'm just wondering what types of questions that you're hearing most from them related to variable rate irrigation, and John, you could probably answer a similar question.
Yeah, I think the potato site is particularly interesting because I liken it to putting lipstick on a pig. This site has an old Lockwood pivot that's probably 35 years old. And the irrigator, rather than put up a new pivot, said, well, I'm just going to go back, functionally it works great. So he just went back and retrofitted it with some state-of-the-art technology. So a lot of growers, they see a lot of this old antiquated equipment, and I think a lot of times it's kind of this idea of planned obsolescence, but this grower in particular kind of breathed new life into something that I think a lot of people would have been looking at it from a salvage value standpoint. They spent a lot of time and a lot of effort making sure that it was well engineered and well instrumented. But the growers that have really started asking a lot of questions about, some of them have been trained to use the irrigation scheduling software that was developed by North Dakota, but they're also realists, and they're wanting to be able to go in and have some site-specific information to feed into their system so that they can be assured that they're meeting the water demands of their actively transpiring crop.
I guess I would have to say here in Wisconsin, we're maybe a little bit behind the 8 ball on the VRI variable rate stuff. We've got several of the more progressive growers, primarily Central Sands potato growers, that are using it. We have a local company up in that area called Precision Waterworks that offers the service of mapping soils and setting up VRI prescriptions and that sort of thing. And so they're making some inroads, but they're not making a lot of inroads. I would say there's the early adapters have taken it on and are starting to do it, but really overall we haven't seen a large movement or what I would call significant interest in the VRI applications here in Wisconsin so much. It's just we're trying to get them up to speed and make everybody aware of that technology, and certainly all of the equipment dealers here in the state have it and are talking to growers about it. But just from my experience thus far, I haven't really seen any sort of large-scale adoption. It's really just been the some of the more cutting-edge early adopters that have started to do that in combination with using more sophisticated probes with telemetry on them, and then placing those probes based on the mapping and all that sort of thing that you were talking about earlier, Josh. So, yeah, we're seeing it, but I would say not to any great degree.
Thank you both. And I think you started touching on this a little bit, but what do you see as some of the biggest barriers to adopting precision irrigation technologies in your states, and what did you hear? I know, John, you weren't able to attend the session in Nebraska, but there were a number of states there, and did you all have any sense in those conversations about what some of the primary barriers are to adopting precision irrigation technologies, and also what do you see as Extension's role in working with producers to increase adoption of those technologies?
This is Josh. One of the major stumbling blocks I think that a lot of guys go into is, or one of the major questions they have is, if you're putting this onto a new pivot, there's significant costs associated with retrofitting a system for VRI. It could range from on your average 7 or 8 span pivot, you're talking about $40,000 to $60,000, and that doesn't include if you have to go in and put in a VFD. So cost is a major component. There's also some of the challenges that are associated with you're increasing some of the complexity, and do you have enough physical variability within the field to justify those increased costs, and can you recoup your investment? I think that those are questions that are being asked right now, and to be real honest, I don't know that we'll be able to answer those in the next 2 or 3 years, because this is still a relatively young and maturing technology.
Yeah, I would totally agree with what Josh said, that here, the big barriers has been the cost associated with it, and then the return on investment. You can go out and you can do the mapping, and it kind of depends, obviously site to site in terms of what that variability is going to be. I was just meeting with a researcher the other day that had a field mapped, and I think he said he saw a difference in EC of about maximum 4%. Well, that's not a big enough difference to really justify, going with a VRI type system. But other types of fields, other soils, under other pivots, it may be a different story. So I think it's going to be highly site specific for one thing, but certainly, yeah, that cost, of bringing in that technology and the complexity, a lot of these, at least on our end here, just getting growers to go out and monitor soil moisture and follow a scheduler has been a challenge in terms of the complexity of technology. To put in variable rate prescriptions and things like that is a whole nother level that some of them just don't really want to go there yet, at least unless they can be really convinced that it's going to make a big difference for them.
Great, thanks to you both. One more question on the quantity related irrigation issues, Josh. You've got this team, this North Central team or group of folks interested in irrigation and working on irrigation that's been working together over the past number of months. I'm putting you on the spot a little bit here, but what do you see? What are some things that are coming up for that group, or do you expect to be working, continuing to work together as opportunities come up, or what's next?
I think right now we'll learn an outcome of our USDA National Institute for Food and Ag application. We'll learn about that a little bit more at the end of the season. Specifically, I think we have some water quality issues that we all kind of acknowledge are, pretty similar across a lot of our areas. One of the things that's emerging now, and it's not really irrigation, it kind of more falls onto the drainage side of things, is there's been a lot of interest from the grower community and from some of the researchers on looking at how do we use capture drainage water to sub-irrigate through tile systems. Specifically in the Dakotas and Minnesota, where we have a pretty extensive network of tile drainage, by using controlled drainage structures, we pump water across the top of those stop logs and sub-irrigate. I think that's something that is a little bit higher profile because there's probably a lot more tile drainage in our area than there is overhead sprinkler irrigation. So that's one of the things that some of our participants have talked a little bit more about. And to be real honest, I know I'm interested in learning more about it.
Thanks. And we'll have, I think there's a commitment to have this irrigation group get together in March 21st through 23rd at the next North Central Region Water Network Conference. That'll be in Lincoln, Nebraska, so you'll maybe get to see a little bit of what's going on there in Lincoln. There's some amazing irrigation knowledge and practice going on there, both on the research side and the extension side. And any questions for Becky? I really want to give people an opportunity for that. And then Becky, I know you've released some of the information that you found from these pathogen studies, and it seems like people still have some concern or questions about the data. Is there anything that you can tell us there, about things that you still feel like you need to address with the group, or what are the outstanding concerns that you're still hearing?
The data, we feel pretty strongly that it's accurate. I think Mark put a lot of time into QA quality controls and the data and how it's represented. It's more questions of how you then interpret that data and what people think certain things mean. But we have gone over that extensively in our group. And one of the things we're trying to use the data to do is make recommendations on technology use. And in our report, I'm sorry, I just didn't have time to get into any of this, but what the impact of using different wind speeds, operating at different wind speeds, or what kind of nozzles we recommend, or what kind of drop height that you would need to minimize some things. So there would be a lot of detail out there provided in some of that. I think the bigger concerns will come with, after our group recommendations, where regulatory agencies want to go with this, and where they pick an acceptable level of risk, and what they, from the recommendations, what they decide to implement in terms of nutrient management and regulations concerning application with their agricultural livestock permits. So hopefully everything and any opinions and information will all be in the report, and there'll be detailed webinars coming up soon to go into depth about all of these pieces.
One of the questions that Rebecca had asked a little bit earlier was actually which states were participating in the proposal in the USDA, our Water for Ag proposal. And that was, we had North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, Nebraska, and then involvement from Wisconsin, Michigan, and also Indiana. So those were the states that were participating in that.
Thanks, Josh. And thanks to everybody for participating today. Thanks particularly to our speakers, and for all of you joining us via the web. Our session will be archived in a week or so, so you'll be able to, we'll send the link out for that, and you'll be able to send that on to other folks that might be interested. It will be at northcentralwater.org. And our next session is coming up in September 16th, and will be on citizen volunteer water quality monitoring. Thanks so much, and have a great afternoon.